The jagged peaks of Glacier National Park pierced the Montana sky, their snow-dusted summits glowing faintly under a crescent moon. It was July 12, 2024, and the vast wilderness, a labyrinth of glacier-carved valleys and turquoise lakes, held a secret it wasn't ready to share. Elias Morrow, a 32-year-old survivalist with a reputation for taming the wild, had taken his 1-year-old daughter, Ivy, for what was supposed to be a routine overnight camping trip in the park's backcountry. Elias was no stranger to these mountains. He'd spent years navigating their trails, teaching wilderness survival workshops, and preaching the gospel of preparation. To him, the wild wasn't a threat. It was a sanctuary, a place where every problem had a solution if you knew where to look. His wife, Nora, trusted his expertise implicitly. She'd kissed Ivy's forehead, tucked into the bright red baby carrier strapped to Elias's back, and waved them off from the trailhead near Bear Hat Mountain. "Be safe," she'd said, her voice light but laced with the quiet unease any mother feels when her child ventures into the unknown. Elias had grinned, his weathered face creasing under a faded baseball cap. "Always am," he replied. They were supposed to return by noon the next day. When 2 p.m. rolled around and the parking lot remained empty, Nora's unease hardened into dread. Elias was never late. Not with Ivy. His life revolved around precision, redundant fire starters, topographic maps folded with military neatness, a satellite phone charged and ready. For him to miss their rendezvous by 2 hours was not a misstep. It was a scream in the silence. By 4 p.m., Nora was on the phone with Park Dispatch, her voice steady but brittle, recounting every detail she could muster. Elias Morrow, 32, 6 feet tall, brown hair, last seen wearing a gray jacket and carrying a red baby carrier with Ivy, 1-year-old, dressed in a pale blue onesie and a tiny sun hat. Their campsite was planned for a clearing near Hidden Lake, a moderate 6-mile hike from the trailhead. He'd sent a single text at 9:47 a.m. the previous morning, a photo of Ivy, her wide eyes sparkling as she pointed at a chipmunk, with Elias's hand visible, steadying her in the carrier. The caption read, "She's loving this. See you tomorrow, love." That was the last Nora heard from them. At the Going to the Sun Road Ranger Station, the report landed with a thud on the desk of Ranger Lena Caldwell, a 15-year veteran whose wind-burned face bore the weight of every lost hiker she'd ever searched for. Glacier National Park was a paradox, stunningly beautiful yet unforgiving, its 1 million acres a maze of dense forests, sheer cliffs, and grisly country. A missing survivalist with a toddler wasn't just a case, it was a crisis. Elias's expertise made the situation all the more unsettling. Amateurs get lost in predictable ways, wandering off trails, underestimating weather, forgetting water. But Elias? He could build a shelter from pine boughs, start a fire in a downpour, and navigate by the stars. For him to vanish with his daughter suggested something sudden, something catastrophic. The search began before dusk, a well-oiled machine of urgency. Helicopters buzzed over the park's alpine meadows, their spotlights slicing through the gathering dark. Ground teams, clad in orange vests, fanned out from Hidden Lake, their shouts swallowed by the wind and the endless whisper of pine needles. Glacier's terrain was a beast of its own. Trails vanished into boulder fields, streams plunged into canyons, and fog could erase a landmark in minutes. The searchers combed the area for signs, a dropped pacifier, a scrap of fabric, a boot print in the mud. They found nothing. Not a single trace of Elias or Ivy. By day 3, the operation had swelled to include volunteers from Kalispell and Whitefish, dog teams trained to catch human scent, and drones equipped with thermal imaging. Nora, hollow-eyed and clutching a stuffed bear Ivy loved, stood at the command post, answering the same questions over and over. Had Elias mentioned any alternate routes? Did he have enemies? Could he have left intentionally? The last question stung like a slap. Elias lived for Ivy. He'd spent months researching the safest baby carriers, testing them in their backyard, ensuring every buckle was secure. The idea of him abandoning his family was as absurd as the sun not rising. Yet as days turned to weeks, the absence of evidence fueled darker theories. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Had Elias, the survivalist, staged a disappearance to live off-grid? The cruelty of the idea gnawed at Nora, who spent nights scouring the photo he'd sent, searching for clues in the chipmunk, the trees, the angle of the light. By month 2, the search scaled back. The helicopters stopped flying. The volunteers went home. The park, with its indifferent beauty, seemed to close ranks around its secret. Nora refused to stop. She quit her job as a graphic designer, drained their savings hiring private investigators, and walked the trails herself, calling Ivy's name until her voice broke. The world moved on, but for Nora, time stopped on July 12, 2024. Then, on April 8, 2025, 9 months after the disappearance, a hiker named Caleb Voss, a solitary 40-year-old electrician from Missoula, was exploring an off-trail ravine near Red Rock Falls. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just a man who preferred the quiet of the wild to the noise of the world. His boot caught on a patch of loose dirt, and as he steadied himself, he noticed something odd. A shallow hole, barely a foot deep, partially covered by pine needles. Inside, half buried, was a flash of red. It wasn't natural. It didn't belong. Caleb knelt, brushing away the dirt, and his breath caught. It was a red baby carrier, weathered but intact, its straps tangled and its buckles dulled by exposure. The same kind Elias had used to carry Ivy. Caleb's heart raced. He knew the story. Everyone in Montana did. The missing dad and daughter, the endless headlines. He hauled the carrier out, its weight heavier than it should have been, and drove straight to the ranger station. When Ranger Caldwell saw it, her hands trembled. She'd stared at that red carrier in photos for months, taped above her desk like a taunt. This was no coincidence. The case wasn't cold anymore. It was alive, screaming for answers. And if you're watching this, you're part of this story now. Don't let Elias and Ivy's mystery fade into the wilderness. Subscribe to this channel to follow every twist, because ignoring this could mean letting the truth slip away forever. The red baby carrier sat on the ranger station counter, its vibrant color a stark contrast to the muted greens and grays of Glacier National Park's endless wilderness. Ranger Lena Caldwell's fingers traced the faded nylon, her mind racing. 9 months had passed since Elias Morrow and his 1-year-old daughter Ivy vanished near Hidden Lake, and this single object was the first tangible link to their fate. It wasn't just any carrier. It was the carrier, identical to the one in the photo Elias sent Nora, its bright red fabric unmistakable even after months in the wild. The shallow hole where Caleb Voss found it, barely a foot deep and tucked in a ravine near Red Rock Falls, raised immediate questions. How did it get there? Why was it buried? And where were Elias and Ivy? The discovery electrified the Park Service, pulling the case from the limbo of cold files into a frenetic new investigation. Caldwell called in the Flathead County Sheriff's Department and the National Park Service's Investigative Services Branch. The carrier was bagged, tagged, and sent to the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula, where forensic scientist Dr. Hannah Keene, a specialist in trace evidence, took charge. Her lab was a sterile world of microscopes and chemical analyzers, a place where objects told stories the wilderness refused to share. Keene's team began dissecting the carrier with surgical precision, photographing every stitch, swab, and stain. The fabric was weathered but not destroyed, its buckles tarnished, its straps frayed but intact. They scraped dirt from the seams, finding pine needles, pollen, and microscopic flecks of granite unique to Glacier's Bear Hat Mountain region. The initial assumption was that the carrier had been in that hole for 9 months, exposed to Montana's brutal seasons. Summer heat, autumn rains, winter snows. But as Keene's tests rolled in, a different picture emerged. The nylon's UV degradation was minimal, far less than expected for an object left outdoors for nearly a year. The red dye, while faded, retained a chemical signature suggesting only a few months of sunlight exposure. The foam padding inside the shoulder straps was another anomaly. It was dry, free of the mold or water damage inevitable in a damp, shallow hole repeatedly soaked by snowmelt. Keene's report was unequivocal. The carrier had spent most of its missing time in a protected environment, somewhere dark, dry, and sheltered. This wasn't a resting place. It was a drop point. Someone, or something, had moved it to that ravine. The revelation shifted the investigation's focus. If the carrier hadn't been buried for 9 months, where had it been? And why was it placed in a hole so shallow it seemed almost designed to be found? Caldwell and the sheriff's department turned to the park's environmental scientists, experts in Glacier's volatile weather and terrain. They combed through meteorological data from the past year, searching for a natural event that could explain the carrier's journey. They found a lead in late February 2025, when a freak spring thaw triggered a mudslide near Red Rock Falls. The slide wasn't massive, but it was powerful enough to churn up soil and debris, potentially dislodging objects from hidden places. The theory took shape. The carrier had been stashed somewhere, perhaps a cave or overhang, and the mudslide had carried it downslope, depositing it in the shallow hole where Caleb found it. This wasn't random chance. It was a clue pointing to a specific origin. The team needed to trace the mudslide's path backward, upstream, into the rugged heart of the park. Using LiDAR data, they mapped the slide's flow, creating a digital model of twisting channels and debris paths. The simulations pointed to a narrow, boulder-strewn drainage above Red Rock Falls, a place called Stony Creek Basin, a treacherous off-trail area rarely visited even by seasoned hikers. It was a labyrinth of cliffs, talus fields, and hidden alcoves, the kind of place Elias, with his survivalist instincts, might have sought for shelter. The search pivoted with a new urgency. Caldwell assembled a specialized team, a mountaineering expert, a canine handler with a scent dog, and 3 backcountry rangers who knew Glacier's terrain like their own skin. Their mission was to scour Stony Creek Basin for the carrier's original hiding place, a cave, a crevice, anything that matched Keene's profile of a dry, sheltered environment. As they prepared, Nora Morrow arrived at the ranger station, her face pale but resolute. She'd been called about the carrier and insisted on joining the briefing. Her hands shook as she touched the evidence photo, recognizing the red fabric instantly. "This was hers," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Where's my baby?" Caldwell met her eyes, promising answers, but inside she felt the weight of the unknown. The basin was a needle in a haystack, and every day without Ivy felt like a failure. The team set out at dawn, their packs heavy with climbing gear and forensic kits. Stony Creek Basin was a beast. Its cliffs rose like jagged teeth, its ground a chaos of loose rock and tangled roots. They moved slowly, guided by the LiDAR maps checking every overhang and fissure. For 2 days, they found nothing but wind-scoured stone and the faint tracks of a mountain goat. On the 3rd day, the K9, a German shepherd named Juno, froze near a cluster of boulders at the basin's edge. Her nose twitched and she let out a low whine. The handler signaled the team, who cleared away a curtain of vines to reveal a low, narrow opening in the rock, a hidden cave, its entrance barely 3 feet high. Caldwell's pulse quickened. This was the kind of place Elias would choose. Concealed, dry, defensible. She crawled inside, her flashlight cutting through the dark. The cave was shallow, maybe 12 feet deep, its floor a mix of dirt and flat stone. In the far corner, something caught the light. A pile of tattered fabric, the remnants of a gray jacket. Beside it, a rusted multi-tool and a water bottle, its label long gone. The team's medic, a quiet woman named Tara, knelt to examine the scene. There were bones, human, arranged as if the person had curled up to rest. The skull showed a fracture, and the leg bones were shattered, signs of a catastrophic fall. Dental records would later confirm it was Elias Morrow. He'd survived long enough to crawl here seeking shelter, but his injuries had won. Yet there was no sign of Ivy, no tiny bones, no scraps of her blue onesie. Nothing to suggest she'd been here. The absence was a gut punch. Where was she? As the forensic team processed the cave, Tara sifted through the dirt near the entrance and froze. Her gloved hand brushed something hard, metallic, half-buried. It was a small, rusted knife, its handle wrapped in faded orange paracord, knotted in a distinctive spiral pattern. Caldwell's breath caught. She'd seen that pattern before, years ago, on gear confiscated from a poacher named Amos Reed, a local who'd been cited for illegal trapping in the park. The knife wasn't Elias's. Someone else had been here. The cave wasn't just a shelter. It was a crime scene. This case is far from over, and the truth is still out there, buried in Glacier's shadows. Don't let Ivy's story fade. Subscribe now, because turning away could mean abandoning a little girl who needs us all to keep searching. The discovery of the paracord-wrapped knife turned the cave into a question mark, its walls whispering secrets that refused to come clear. Ranger Lena Caldwell held the rusted blade under her flashlight, its orange-wrapped handle a jarring anomaly in the somber scene of Elias Morrow's final resting place. This wasn't a survivalist tool. It was a poacher's, crude and purpose-built, the kind used to skin game or pry roots from the earth. The distinctive spiral pattern of the paracord was no coincidence. Caldwell's memory flickered to a 2020 encounter with Amos Reed, a wiry, sharp-eyed local who'd been caught setting illegal snares near Lake McDonald. His gear, confiscated after a tense standoff, included a similar knife, its handle wrapped in that same meticulous knotwork. The realization hit like a stone dropping into still water. Elias hadn't been alone in his final moments. Someone else had stood in this cave, and that someone might hold the key to Ivy's fate. The investigation surged back to life, its focus no longer just on finding a body but on chasing a ghost. The knife was bagged and sent to Dr. Hannah Keene's lab in Missoula, where her team scoured it for evidence. The blade yielded no fingerprints or DNA. The years in the damp cave had erased those traces, but its presence was a screaming clue. It didn't belong to Elias, whose gear was meticulously cataloged in Nora's records. A high-end multi-tool, a lightweight stove, a satellite phone, all accounted for in the cave's debris except the phone, which was missing. The knife suggested an encounter, possibly a confrontation, and it pointed to Amos Reed. Caldwell dug into the park's archives, pulling files on Reed. He was a known figure in Glacier's underbelly, a 45-year-old loner who lived in a trailer on the park's edge, surviving on odd jobs and suspected poaching. He wasn't a mastermind, but he was cunning, slipping through the wilderness like smoke, always one step ahead of rangers. His record showed citations for illegal trapping and fishing, but nothing violent. Yet the knife's presence in the cave, coupled with the missing satellite phone, painted a darker picture. Had Reed stumbled across Elias injured and vulnerable, and made a choice that changed everything? The team needed to find him. Public records showed Reed still lived in West Glacier, his address a weathered trailer park near the Flathead River. But when deputies visited, the trailer was empty, its windows dark, a rusted padlock on the door. Neighbors said Reed hadn't been seen in months, not since the previous fall. He'd always been a drifter, they said, disappearing into the park for weeks at a time. The timing gnawed at Caldwell. Reed's absence coincided roughly with the February mudslide that had likely dislodged the red baby carrier. Was he running or was he just lying low? The investigation widened with the sheriff's department issuing a bolo for Reed across Montana and into Idaho and Washington. Meanwhile, the cave's secrets deepened the mystery of Ivy. The absence of her remains was both a relief and a torment. If she wasn't here, where was she? The red carrier found in that shallow hole held no traces of her, no diaper fragments, no formula stains, nothing to suggest she'd been with Elias in his final hours. Nora, who'd been called to the station to view the knife's photo, clutched Ivy's stuffed bear, her voice a whisper. If she's not there, she's alive. She has to be. Caldwell wanted to believe her, but the knife's presence suggested something uglier than a simple accident. The team returned to Stony Creek Basin, this time with a forensic anthropologist, Dr. Marcus Tate, who specialized in reconstructing death scenes. Tate's examination of Elias's remains confirmed the initial findings. A fall from the cliff above, likely 40 feet, had shattered his pelvis and femur. He'd crawled into the cave, surviving perhaps a day or two before succumbing to internal injuries and exposure. But Tate found something else. A small, faint scratch on Elias's ulna, a mark that could have come from a blade. It wasn't definitive proof of foul play, but it was enough to make Caldwell's stomach turn. Had Reed attacked Elias, or had he simply found him dying and taken advantage of the situation? The missing satellite phone was another puzzle piece. Elias's model was rugged, designed for backcountry use, with a battery that could last days. If Reed had taken it, he could have used it to call for help, or chosen not to. The team scoured the cave for more clues, finding only fragments of Elias's backpack and a single crumpled energy bar wrapper. The cave was dry, as Keene's analysis suggested, but its entrance was exposed to wind, which could have scattered smaller items like Ivy's clothing or toys. The red carrier's journey remained the critical thread. The mudslide had carried it from somewhere in the basin to the ravine, but where had it been hidden? The team expanded their search, focusing on other caves and overhangs within the LiDAR-modeled flood path. They found nothing. No other shelters, no signs of human passage. The basin's terrain was relentless, its cliffs and thickets fighting every step. On day 5, a ranger named Quinn, a wiry climber with a knack for spotting hidden roots, noticed a faint disturbance in the soil near a boulder pile 200 yards from the cave. It was subtle, a patch of earth less compacted than its surroundings, as if it had been dug up and replaced. He called Tate over, and they carefully excavated, uncovering a small, deliberate cache. A plastic bag containing a map, a flint striker, and a folded note. The map was a topographic printout of the hidden lake area, marked with Elias's planned campsite. The note, scrawled in fading ink, read, "Ivy safe. Tell Nora." The handwriting matched Elias's, confirmed later by Nora's tearful nod. The discovery was a lightning bolt. Elias had believed Ivy was safe, even as he lay dying. But safe with whom? The note suggested he'd entrusted her to someone, possibly Reed, whose knife was left behind. The cache's location, outside the cave but within the flood path, suggested it had been buried intentionally, perhaps by Reed, only to be disturbed by the mudslide. The investigation now had a dual focus: find Reed and find Ivy. Caldwell's team contacted the FBI, who brought in digital forensics experts to trace the satellite phone's signal history, hoping it had been used after Elias's death. Meanwhile, Nora's hope flared, but so did her fear. If Ivy was alive, she was out there, possibly with a man who'd left her father to die. The truth is still buried in Glacier's wild heart, and we're the only ones keeping this story alive. Subscribe now. Don't let Ivy's fate be forgotten, because every second we hesitate could be the moment her trail goes cold forever. The note in Elias Morrow's handwriting, "Ivy safe, tell Nora," was a fragile thread of hope, but it came with a shadow of dread. Ranger Lena Caldwell clutched the evidence bag, the scrawled words burning into her mind as she stood in the Stony Creek Basin, the wind howling through Glacier National Park's unforgiving cliffs. If Elias believed his 1-year-old daughter was safe, who had he entrusted her to in his final moments? The paracord-wrapped knife pointed to Amos Reed, a poacher whose presence in the cave suggested more than a chance encounter. The note, found buried in a cache outside the cave, hinted at a desperate act. Elias, dying, had passed Ivy to someone, perhaps Reed, believing it was her only chance. But 9 months later, Ivy was still missing and Reed was a ghost. The investigation was no longer just a search for a missing father and daughter. It was a hunt for a man who might hold the key to a little girl's fate. Caldwell's team escalated their efforts, coordinating with the FBI's field office in Helena. The satellite phone, missing from Elias's gear, became a focal point. Digital forensics experts pulled records from the service provider, searching for any pings after July 12, 2024. A single hit came back, a brief signal on July 13, 2024 at 3:17 a.m., from a remote ridge near Stony Creek Basin, less than a mile from the cave. The call hadn't connected, no message, no voicemail. But the phone had been powered on, its GPS briefly active. Whoever had it was in the park, and the timing suggested it was shortly after Elias's death. Reed was the prime suspect, but his trailer remained empty, his whereabouts unknown. The FBI issued a nationwide alert, flagging his name and description. 45, lean, graying hair, last seen driving a beat-up green pickup. Local informants in West Glacier whispered that Reed had ties to a network of poachers who trafficked in bear gallbladders and rare plants, a shadowy trade that thrived in the park's remote corners. If Reed had ivy, he could be anywhere, holed up in a backcountry camp or long gone across state lines. Nora Morrow, meanwhile, was unraveling. The note had shattered her fragile equilibrium. She spent hours at the ranger station, poring over maps and photos, her fingers tracing the red baby carrier's outline in evidence photos. He wrote she's safe, she said, her voice raw. He wouldn't lie to me. Caldwell nodded, but her mind churned with questions. If Reed had taken Ivy, why? Was it compassion, panic, or something darker? The shallow hole where the carrier was found, barely concealed, felt deliberate, like a taunt or a mistake. The mudslide theory held, but the carrier's condition, protected for months before being dislodged, suggested it had been hidden intentionally, perhaps by Reed, only to be exposed by nature's violence. The team returned to Stony Creek Basin, now a grid of orange flags marking search zones. They focused on the ridge where the satellite phone had pinged, a steep forested spine overlooking the basin. The terrain was brutal, loose scree, tangled hemlock, and cliffs that dropped into oblivion. On day 7, the K-9, Juno, caught a scent near a rocky outcrop. Her handler followed, uncovering a small man-made depression beneath a fallen log, hidden by moss. Inside was a plastic container, its lid cracked but sealed, containing a single item, a baby's pacifier, pale blue like the one Nora described Ivy using. The discovery was a gut punch. It was Ivy's, confirmed by Nora's tearful nod over a video call. The container, like the carrier, showed minimal weathering, suggesting it too had been stashed in a protected place until the mudslide scattered it. The pacifier was sent to Dr. Keene's lab, where trace analysis found no DNA but detected traces of charcoal and pine sap, hinting at a campfire nearby. Reed, a poacher, would know how to build a hidden camp, and the ridge was a perfect spot, remote, defensible, with a clear view of approaching rangers. Caldwell's team scoured the ridge, finding faint signs of human activity, a flattened patch of earth, a charred stick, a snag of green thread caught on a thorn. The thread matched nothing in Elias's gear, but resembled the cheap jackets Reed was known to wear. The evidence was mounting, but it was circumstantial. They needed Reed himself. The FBI widened their net, tracking his known associates. A tip came from a gas station clerk in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, who'd seen a man matching Reed's description buying diapers and formula in August 2024, a month after the disappearance. The clerk remembered him because he'd paid in cash and seemed nervous, glancing over his shoulder. The diapers were for a 1-year-old, the same age as Ivy. The lead sent a shiver through the team. Was Ivy alive, cared for by a man who'd left her father to die? The thought was both hopeful and horrifying. Nora clung to it, her eyes burning with a mother's desperation. "She's out there," she told Caldwell. "I can feel her." The investigation dug deeper into Reed's world. Park records showed he'd been sighted near Stony Creek Basin in 2023, suggesting he knew the area well. His poaching network operated in small, tight-knit crews, often family members or childhood friends. One name surfaced repeatedly: Lila Reed, his younger sister, a 38-year-old who lived in a cabin near Libby, Montana, 60 miles from the park. Lila had no criminal record but was known to join Amos on hunting trips that rangers suspected were cover for poaching. A background check revealed she'd recently enrolled a toddler in a daycare under the name Clara, claiming the girl was her niece. The age matched Ivy's. Caldwell's heart raced as she briefed the FBI. Lila's cabin became the next target, but they had to move carefully. If Ivy was there, a wrong move could spook Lila or Amos, risking the girl's safety. The team planned a low-key approach, a welfare check, not a raid. Caldwell, 2 agents, and a social worker would visit, using the pacifier and knife as leverage to gauge Lila's reaction. The drive to Libby was tense, the road winding through dense forest under a gray April sky. Lila's cabin was a ramshackle structure, its yard cluttered with old tires and a tricycle. As Caldwell knocked, a curtain twitched and a woman's voice called, "Who's there?" Lila Reed opened the door, her face guarded, her eyes darting to the pacifier in Caldwell's hand. The air grew heavy with unspoken truths, and the investigation stood on the edge of a breakthrough, or a dead end. Ivy's fate hangs in the balance, and every moment we hesitate could mean losing her forever. Subscribe now. Don't let this little girl's story be buried in silence, because your support could be the key to bringing her home. Lila Reed's eyes locked onto the blue pacifier in Ranger Lena Caldwell's hand, her face a mask of guarded tension that betrayed a flicker of recognition. The air outside her ramshackle cabin in Libby, Montana, was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, but inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Caldwell stood on the creaking porch, flanked by 2 FBI agents and a social worker, their plainclothes doing little to soften the weight of their presence. The tricycle in the yard, its red paint chipped, hinted at a child's life here, and the possibility that Ivy Morrow, now nearly 2 years old, might be inside sent a jolt through Caldwell's veins. Lila's voice was sharp, defensive. "What do you want?" she asked, her hand gripping the doorframe. Caldwell held up the evidence bag, letting the pacifier catch the dim light. "We found this in Glacier National Park near Stony Creek Basin. We think it's connected to a missing child. Can we talk?" Lila's gaze faltered, her knuckles whitening, but she didn't slam the door. Instead, she stepped back, letting them in. The cabin was sparse. A sagging couch, a wood stove, a toddler's sippy cup on a cluttered table. From a back room, a small figure peeked out, a girl with dark curls and wide, curious eyes, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Nora's description of Ivy flashed in Caldwell's mind. Dark hair, a heart-shaped face, a smile that lit up the world. The girl's age fit, but her calm demeanor suggested a life rooted here, not one of captivity. Caldwell's heart sank even as it raced. Could this be Ivy, raised by a stranger? The social worker, a soft-spoken woman named Emily, knelt to the girl's level, offering a gentle smile. "Hey, sweetheart. What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Clara." Lila's voice cut in, too quick. "She's my niece, been with me since last summer." The agents exchanged glances. The timeline matched Elias and Ivy's disappearance, but Lila's story was thin, her eyes avoiding the pacifier. Caldwell pulled out a second evidence bag, this one holding the paracord-wrapped knife. "We also found this," she said, watching Lila closely. "It was in a cave with Elias Morrow's remains. We think it belongs to your brother, Amos." Lila's breath hitched, her hand flying to her throat. The reaction was raw, unguarded, and it told Caldwell everything she needed to know. Lila was involved. The agents pressed gently, explaining the cave, the note, the red baby carrier found in a shallow hole. Lila's composure cracked, tears welling as she sank onto the couch. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. The story poured out, a confession born of guilt and fear. In July 2024, Amos had been poaching in Stony Creek Basin, hunting for bear gallbladders to sell on the black market. He'd heard a cry, human, not animal, and found Elias at the base of a cliff, his body broken from a fall. Beside him, in the red carrier, was Ivy, unharmed but crying. Elias, barely conscious, had begged Amos to save his daughter. "Take her to Nora," he'd gasped, pressing a folded note into Amos's hand. Amos, panicked and fearing blame for Elias's death, made a split-second choice. He took Ivy in the carrier, leaving the knife and his water bottle behind in his haste. He didn't call for help. His record made him wary of authorities. Instead, he brought Ivy to Lila, claiming he'd found her abandoned. Lila, childless and lonely, took the girl in, naming her Clara. They told no one, living in quiet terror of discovery. Amos, overwhelmed by guilt, had fled months ago, leaving Lila to raise the girl alone. The red carrier, stashed in a shed behind the cabin, had been swept away during the February mudslide, ending up in the ravine where Caleb Voss found it. The satellite phone, Amos had confessed to Lila, was lost in the park. He'd dropped it while fleeing the basin. Caldwell listened, her jaw tight. The confession explained the carrier, the note, the knife, but it didn't erase the betrayal. Amos had left Elias to die, and Lila had kept Ivy from her mother for 9 months. The social worker gently coaxed Clara into a playroom where she sat with her rabbit, oblivious to the storm unfolding. A DNA test was arranged, a swab taken from the girl's cheek with Lila's reluctant consent. The agents took Lila into custody for questioning, her sobs echoing as she was led to the car. Caldwell stayed behind, watching the girl, her heart torn between relief and rage. If this was Ivy, Nora's nightmare was over, but a new one was beginning for a child who knew only Lila as family. The DNA results came 48 hours later, confirming what Caldwell already suspected. The girl was Ivy Morrow. Nora was called to the station, her face a mix of disbelief and joy as she clutched the stuffed bear she'd carried for 9 months. When she saw Ivy, playing quietly in a room with Emily, she collapsed, sobbing. Ivy looked up, confused, her small hand reaching out. "Mama," she said, but it wasn't clear who she meant. The reunion was bittersweet, a moment of hope shadowed by the trauma of separation. Lila faced charges for failing to report a found child, while the hunt for Amos intensified. His green pickup was spotted in Idaho, but he remained elusive, a shadow in the wilderness he knew too well. The case was solved, but its ripples lingered. Nora faced the daunting task of rebuilding a bond with a daughter who didn't remember her, while Lila's grief and Amos's guilt painted a complex portrait of human desperation. Glacier National Park, with its silent peaks and hidden valleys, had given up one secret but kept others, its vastness a reminder that some truths remain buried. For Caldwell,